I'm talking about what is necessary for political change, and I thought I'd start with a quote from this chap, Zygmunt Bauman, who's, I think, the greatest living thinker who's living and thinks. And what Bauman said was, the good society is one that knows it's not good enough, and I've been trying to make a good society a better society for about 30 years. I've probably learnt more in the last 3 years than I've learnt in the 27 years before that. And I'm just going to pick up 3 things that seem to matter to me about how do you make political change happen. And then at the end, one just little ray of hope, which will chime with what was said earlier. So, point 1 of my 3 points of my 30 years condensed into 15 minutes of how do you make political change happen. And the first one, and virtually all of these, as I say, have been learned in the last 3 years and not in all the preceding time before it. Point 1 is that no one's coming to save us. It took me a long time to realise that. I spent most of those 30 years trying to persuade politicians to do what I wanted them to do, to try and force them to make the change happen, to concentrate all of my activities on getting a few individuals at the top to do things and make things happen. And it didn't work. It didn't work because they're pretty ineffectual these days. And when I look at politicians, this is kind of what I see, really. I see people that want to kind of pretend that they're driving a real car, that they're doing real things, that they're making change happen. And increasingly, politicians can't do that. They remind me of my kids when they were sitting in toy cars in the supermarket, steering the steering wheel, pushing the levers, making the lights flash, thinking that they were in control of the world. And maybe once upon a time, they were more in control of the world because that's the way the world did work. You could pull some levers and make things happen. But I don't think you can do that anymore. And I think that's what these people are like. So trying to make them do something, even if you're successful, they're just like kids in a toy car, really. The world no longer works in the way that it once did. They're not very powerful people. They're not going to do what we want them to do. They're not going to make a better society. This chap, Karl Marx, said that we make history but not in conditions of our own choosing. I've learnt that. What matters is the context in which you operate. You can still do stuff, but you have to understand the context in which you operate. And I think we have to understand the context within which we operate now. And I think that change happens much more like this. You have to be a surfer, you have to be alive, but the thing that matters is the wave. On your own, you're not very much, really. Nothing really happens. You can splash around in the shallow end with your boogie board, but actually, unless you're connected to a wave, something, a current, a movement, a kind of a happening in society, then nothing much happens. It's a frustrating term that we make history but not in conditions of our own choosing, because what can you do about it? It's a bit fatalistic to an extent, because sometimes you're in the right times, in the right era, and sometimes you're not. Well, we are where we are, and maybe at the end of my little bit you'll think that there's something to go on as far as the wave beginning to brew up for us to do something about it. From Marx, we go to this chap, Hayek. Hayek was the author of The Road to Serfdom, which is the Bible of the neoliberals. He wrote it in 1948. And Hayek was amazing, I think, because he had the discipline to say, don't go to the politicians. Don't try and lobby the politicians. Wait for the politicians to come to you. Wait until the time is right. And when the time is right, they'll pick up their ideas. Hayek wrote his book in 1948. It wasn't really until 30 years later that the ideas of Hayek, neoliberalism, free markets, Thatcher, Reagan, etc., really took hold. He had a body of ideas. When the crisis happened, the politicians came to him and his ideas, and I've learned a lot from that. So I've been involved in this for 30 years. Why didn't I write a book 30 years ago about my good society, and then in 30 years' time, when there's some sort of a crisis, the politicians would have picked up those ideas? I've obviously just wasted 30 years of my life. And now I'm much more of a Hayekian. I don't believe in free markets, but I do believe in being alive, connected to the wave, having the ideas, waiting for the politicians to come to you, rather than you go to them and lobby them like fury. And in all of that, that tells me of the great phrase that all of us are smarter than any one of us. that you don't put your hopes in a single individual. You don't lobby a single individual and believe that they're going to change things for us. Actually, the wave of the future, the one that is coming, is one that is going to be crowdsourced and crowd-orientated. And there we have the June Jordan from South Africa, who tells us that we are the people that we've been waiting for. Don't expect much of politicians. Expect a lot of yourself and the ways in which you can collaborate with other people to make things happen. So that's point one about no one's coming to save us. My second point is this, that if you want to be a rebel, as James Dean being a rebel without a cause, then you have to be this. You have to be kind. In all of those 30 years that I spent being a political activist and trying to make political things happen, I was trying to kind of build a bigger army than the other side's army. I was trying to defeat them and destroy them. I wrote an article in The Guardian a while ago about the feral elite, the politicians at the top, the judges at the top, the police at the top, the bankers at the top, etc., who were ripping us off and lining their own pockets and cheating and lying, etc. And as soon as I wrote this article about the feral elite, I felt it was wrong. The notion that you begin to stigmatise other people and attack other people, it just didn't seem right. Because if there's a feral elite, then there's some kind of like underclass. There's a kind of feral underclass as well. That you don't build the good society by being bad to other people. That in the words of Gandhi, and I won't put Gandhi up on the thing because everyone puts Gandhi up at the thing at TEDx Talks, you have to be the change you wish to see in the world. And I think I'm much more interested now in a politics of empathy, of compassion, of understanding other people, of discussing things with people I don't agree with, because then I learn more than just talking to people I do agree with. So not a politics of armies, of defeat, a politics of understanding, of empathy, of collaboration, of trying to kind of move things on it almost sort of permanently. The job is to persuade the people that you don't agree with that the future you see is the right kind of one. Not to defeat the other side. Because if you try and defeat the other side, you never do it totally. They always come back. And you just end up in a cycle of endless kind of revenge politics. And that isn't the world that I want to live in. And I don't think that any way that means justify the ends. I think you get to a good society by behaving in a good way. There is no shortcut to that. And there's been lots of examples in political history where people have tried to do the right thing but do it in the wrong way. And it always goes wrong. The third bit that I've begun to learn, this is the Aesop fable, just to emphasise the point about being kind and being good. So the Aesop fable is about the traveller, and the wind and the sun have a bet about who can get the traveller to take their coat off, and the wind goes first and blows and blows and blows, and the traveller does their coat up, and then the sun comes out and shines and makes them warm and feel good, and they take their coat off. It's a good analogy for the kind of change that I want to see in the world. The third bit is that when things change, they change very quickly. With the power of your imagination, just think of this brick being connected to a piece of elastic. In my rush, I couldn't find a brick connected to a piece of elastic. When I was 17 at school, I had the world's record failure for GCSE physics. And the only thing I remember from GCSE physics was an experiment where a brick was on a table connected to a piece of elastic. And you pull the brick with the piece of elastic. And of course, nothing happens for a long time. But the elastic becomes more and more tense, and eventually the brick pings across the table and it ends up in your lap. And I just remember that in all my kind of 4 or 5 failures of trying to take GCSE physics, I remember that experiment. And I remember the nature of change, that nothing happens for a long time and then things happen very, very quickly. So we move on from one brick analogy to another brick analogy. That's the fall of the Berlin Wall. If you'd have asked anyone on the 8th of November 1989 whether the Berlin Wall was going to fall the next day, they'd have said, don't be stupid. But underlying all the months and years, weeks, days before the fall of the Berlin Wall, there was this wave being created, this wave building up of saying something's got to change, something's got to happen, and then snap, like that, it changes and things move on. So that's the kind of 3 things, that no one's coming to save us, that if we want to be a rebel, then we have to be kind, and that we have to realise that things change very, very quickly. And when things can feel quite desperate, then all of a sudden, the Arab Spring, Scotland, all sorts of things can happen just like that and change very quickly. Greece, Spain increasingly. All sorts of changes now beginning to happen very quickly. And I think there's going to be more of this. That's a picture of the internet, social media. A world that is increasingly connected. A world in which everyone knows everything everywhere, where we can speak together and talk together and learn together. And yes, we can be horrible in threads and on social media and whatever else. But I've kind of got a suspicion and a hope, and there's a gap between hopefulness and wishful thinking. But I think we're going through a massive, huge paradigm shift in the way that the world operates, as big as the shift from into the industrial age and industrial society of 200 years ago. That the internet, that social media, that big data, that algorithms, that all of this stuff is creating a massive paradigm shift in the way that we think, operate our culture, our society, our institutions. And the abiding element of that is both interconnection and flatness. That big old hierarchies are being flattened and that more people can connect to each other and can talk to each other. And I welcome that. It's not that I don't think it will be contested, it will be. It will be contested by the Amazons and the Googles and the people that want to commodify it and commercialise it and privatise it. But in that flatness, in that interconnection, there is the hope for us. The hope for us to become more human. The hope for us to talk, to learn, to listen, to engage with each other, to be, yes, more equal and more democratic, because on flatter planes, you have to listen to people. You have to treat people with respect. We were never going to build a good society, a great society, out of old hierarchies of the 20th century. But we could do it in the 21st century if we realised the potential of the flatness, of the interconnection, of our ability to relate to each other, to understand each other, and to do the three things that I've said, which is to recognise that no one's going to come to save us, so we've got to do it together, so we can collaborate more effectively together, that we can move, that we can be kind in those spheres, because you're all on the same level, it's flat, you have to relate to each other as equal citizens and equal human beings. And then finally, that things will happen so fast, because we can connect so quickly, because we can reach each other, because we can talk, because we can organise and get people in rooms or behind petitions or whatever else. Things are going to start happening really, really fast. So that's my bit of hope. I know it's contested, I know it's contentious, but I think it's important that we have hope. And that's a picture of someone called Raymond Williams. He was a Welsh cultural theorist, and Williams said that the test and the job of a true radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing. I think the brick is about to move. I think things are beginning to change really fast. I think they're beginning to happen in ways that enable us and our humanity to come to the fore. Our love, our compassion, our empathy, our regard for each other, our creativity, our innovative skills. I think this is an amazing time, potentially, to be involved in politics, to be involved in education, to be involved in culture. I think I'm convinced by hope. I don't think any change ever happens without hope being the basis for people's operation. And I think today looks like it's going to be a day of hope. And let's hope that that stuff starts to come together in a way that builds the kind of good society, the one that knows it's got to get better and better. Thank you very much.